A millionaire comes home exhausted to his estate, and what he finds in the living room leaves him completely frozen in place. His daughter, who had not smiled in 2 years, was dancing with the housekeeper's son. What he would discover next would shatter him completely. Marcus Harrington pushed open the front door of his Bel Air estate with the weight of a man carrying the whole world on his shoulders. It had been a never-ending day at the headquarters of Harrington Hospitality Group, and all he wanted was to reach his bedroom, kick off his shoes, and disappear from existence for a few hours. But barely 3 steps inside his own home, his legs stopped working. From the main living room came a sound that turned his entire body to stone, as if someone had bolted his feet to the marble floor. It was laughter. A child's laughter. Crystal clear, unfiltered, free. The kind of laughter that Marcus Harrington had not heard in so long, he had almost forgotten what it sounded like. It was the laughter of his daughter, Lily. He moved slowly, holding his breath, as if any sound might shatter this impossible moment like glass. And when he finally leaned into the doorway, what he saw left him without words, without air, without any ability to process what his own eyes were showing him. In the middle of the most elegantly furnished room in the house, sitting cross-legged on the floor with an old acoustic guitar resting across her lap, was Rosa Delgado, the housekeeper his mother had hired just weeks ago. Her fingers moved across the strings with a mastery that had no business belonging to a woman who scrubbed floors for a living. The melody that rose from that guitar was soft, enveloping, like an invisible warmth spreading through every corner of the room. But what absolutely wrecked his heart was seeing Lily, his little girl who had not spoken more than 1-word answers since the death of her mother, was dancing. She was holding hands with a boy Marcus had never seen before, the 2 of them spinning clumsily, the way only children can, with that beautifully imperfect grace that is more stunning than any professional choreography. Lily laughed with her mouth wide open, eyes bright, her whole body vibrating with a joy that seemed to have been locked away for centuries, just waiting for exactly this moment to burst free. Marcus had to grip the doorframe because his legs were trembling beneath him, his vision blurred. He felt something warm track down his face. He was crying. A man who ran a billion-dollar hospitality empire, who negotiated 8-figure deals without blinking, was standing in the hallway of his own home, crying in silence, because his daughter was doing something as simple as laughing. "Who are you?" he wanted to ask the boy dancing with Lily. "What is happening here?" he wanted to demand of the housekeeper, playing guitar like she trained at Juilliard. But the words would not come. He stood there, motionless, watching a scene that seemed pulled from another universe entirely. A reality where his daughter was not broken by grief. The boy dancing with Lily looked maybe a year or 2 older than her. He moved with that boundless childhood energy, guiding Lily with a tenderness that was surprising for his age, spinning her carefully, gently, as if he somehow understood instinctively that she was fragile and needed someone to handle her with care. Again, Lily cried out in a voice Marcus barely recognized, because it had been so long since he had heard her speak with anything close to excitement. Rosa smiled and began playing a new melody, faster this time, and both children exploded into giggles as they tried to follow the rhythm with their small feet. That was when the boy noticed Marcus standing in the doorway. He stopped immediately. His expression shifted from pure joy to pure fear in a fraction of a second. He let go of Lily's hands and stepped back several paces, eyes dropping to the floor, as if he had done something terrible. boy whispered in a shaky voice, tugging at Rosa's sleeve. Rosa looked up. Her eyes met Marcus's. The guitar fell silent. Abruptly, like someone had cut the power. Across Rosa's face spread an expression of absolute terror, the kind that only appears when you know that everything you have built is about to collapse. "Mr. Harrington," Rosa said, getting to her feet so quickly the guitar nearly slipped from her hands. "I can explain. I know I should not have brought my son. His babysitter had an emergency and I had no one else. I promise this will never happen again." "Who is that boy?" Marcus interrupted her. But his voice did not sound the way he expected it to. It did not sound like an angry boss. It sounded like a man who had just witnessed a miracle and needed someone to confirm he was not dreaming. "He is my son, sir. His name is Daniel. I am so sorry. Please do not fire me. This job is everything I—" Lily was laughing. The sentence left Marcus's mouth as a sacred whisper. Rosa went silent, unsure how to interpret those 3 words. "My daughter was laughing," Marcus repeated, and this time his voice cracked, in a way that made even little Daniel lift his eyes from the floor to look at this tall man crying shamelessly in his own living room doorway. "Daddy?" said Lily, walking toward Marcus with that naturalness only children possess, grabbing his hand to pull him toward the center of the room. "Daniel is my friend, and Rosa plays guitar so pretty. Do you want to dance with us?" Marcus knelt in front of his daughter and took her by the shoulders with trembling hands. He looked into her eyes, and he saw something he had stopped searching for. Life. There was life in those eyes that had for so long been vacant, darkened, like the windows of an abandoned house. And that life had not returned because of expensive therapists, not because of imported toys, not because of trips to theme parks in Orlando or Disney World. It had returned because of an old guitar, a housekeeper, and a boy who had taught her to dance. "How long?" Marcus asked Rosa, still wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "How long have you been doing this?" Rosa swallowed hard, visibly terrified that her answer might cost her the job. "It was not planned, sir. The first time I brought Daniel here because I had no one to leave him, with Lily was sitting alone on the staircase. My son walked over and offered to play. She did not respond, but he kept trying, and when I started playing guitar while I cleaned, Lily just stood up and began moving with the music." She paused. "And no one told me to stop." Before Marcus could fully process everything he was feeling, a sharp voice sliced through the air from the hallway like a blade cutting through silk. "What on earth is all this noise?" Eleanor Harrington appeared in the living room entrance, her posture perfectly upright, her expression immaculate. She had spent decades running that house as though it were her own personal kingdom. Her eyes swept the scene with lightning speed. The housekeeper holding a guitar, an unknown child in her living room, her granddaughter holding that child's hand, and her son kneeling on the floor with tears in his eyes. "Marcus, can you explain to me why there is a strange child in my home playing with Lily?" Her voice was calm, the kind of calm that is more threatening than any raised voice. "Grandma, he's my friend," said Lily, with a firmness that surprised everyone in the room, including Marcus. Eleanor looked at her granddaughter as if the girl had just said something forbidden. Then she turned her gaze to Rosa, and what appeared in those eyes made little Daniel instinctively step behind his mother. "Ms. Delgado?" Eleanor said in that particular tone she used to remind every person in that household exactly where they stood in the pecking order. "You were hired to clean, not to organize children's parties in the main living room, and certainly not to bring your children into a home that is not theirs." "Mother," Marcus said, rising slowly to his feet. Lily was laughing. "Do you understand what that means?" What I understand is that my granddaughter needs appropriate companionship, not the company of—" Eleanor stopped herself before completing the sentence. But the damage was done. Everyone in the room understood perfectly what she had been about to say. And then little Daniel, from behind his mother's back, raised his eyes and said something that left the entire room in stunned silence. "Ma'am, I just wanted to play with Lily because she always looked really sad. My mom says that when someone is sad, you hold their hand and you don't let go until they smile again." Eleanor opened her mouth. No words came out. For the first time in a very long time, someone had left her without a response. And that someone was a child who barely reached her waist. "This conversation is not over," Eleanor finally said, directing her gaze specifically at Rosa, with the look of a silent verdict. "Tomorrow morning, first thing, we are going to talk about the terms of your employment in this house." And she walked away, leaving behind a heavy silence that no one dared to break. Marcus looked at Rosa. Her eyes were red. She held her son against her chest, as if she feared someone might tear him away from her. Then he looked at Lily, who had reached back and taken Daniel's hand again, with that quiet determination of children who find something worth holding on to. "Rosa," Marcus said, his voice working hard to project a calm he did not feel. "Don't worry about what my mother said. Nobody is firing you." "But, sir—" "Nobody," Marcus repeated with firm conviction. "What you and your son did for my daughter tonight, there is no salary in the world that can repay that." Rosa nodded silently, but Marcus could see in her eyes that she did not entirely believe him. And he could not blame her, because he also knew his mother never left things alone. Eleanor Harrington never left things alone. That night after Rosa left with Daniel, Marcus did something he had not done in a very long time. He sat on the edge of Lily's bed to tuck her in, and for the first time in what felt like forever, his daughter looked up at him with a smile before closing her eyes. "Daddy?" Lily whispered, already half asleep. "Can Daniel come back tomorrow?" Marcus felt his heart squeeze inside his chest. "We'll see, sweetheart. He told me his daddy is in heaven too, like Mommy," Lily murmured, and with that devastating sentence, she fell deeply asleep. Marcus stayed motionless beside his daughter's bed for several minutes, processing those words. Daniel had also lost his father. Two children broken by the same wound had found each other in the living room of an estate, and without therapists, without diagnoses, without medication, they had healed each other with something as ancient and as powerful as holding hands and dancing. But while Marcus was sitting with that discovery, in another corner of the estate, Eleanor was picking up her phone and dialing a number she kept saved for special occasions. "Vivian," she said with an icy voice, "I need you to come by tomorrow morning. We have a situation that needs to be handled before it gets out of control." On the other end of the line, Vivian Carter smiled in a way that no one would ever want to see in the dark. "Count on me, Eleanor. That's what I'm here for." What neither of them knew was that this phone call would set off a chain of events that would shake the very foundation of that estate and expose secrets that had been buried for years beneath layers of appearances, lies, and a complicit silence that was about to crack open in the most devastating way possible. The next morning, Marcus woke with a strange feeling in his chest. Not anxiety, not dread. Curiosity. A deep, gnawing curiosity that burned inside him like a flame someone had lit the night before and that refused to go out. Who was Rosa Delgado really? That question followed him as he dressed, as he walked downstairs, as he poured his coffee in the main dining room. A woman who scrubbed floors did not play guitar like that. Rosa's fingers had moved across the strings with the fluency of someone who had spent years, maybe decades, mastering that instrument. There was something in her story that did not fit, a missing piece of the puzzle. And Marcus Harrington was a man who could not live with incomplete puzzles. But before he could organize his thoughts, Vivian Carter was already seated at the dining table with a cup of tea between her hands and a smile that looked rehearsed in front of a mirror. "Good morning, Marcus," Vivian said with that familiarity she had awarded herself since Eleanor named her house manager. "Your mother told me what happened last night. That must have been very uncomfortable for you." Marcus looked at her over his coffee cup. Uncomfortable. Vivian, my daughter, laughed for the first time in years. It was not uncomfortable. It was the best thing that has happened to me in a long time. Of course, Vivian responded quickly, adjusting her tone like someone changing a TV channel. "What I mean is, I understand the emotion of the moment, but your mother is right to be concerned. We know nothing about that woman or her son, and allowing an unknown child to have free access to Lily in her emotionally fragile state—" "Daniel is not a danger to my daughter," Marcus interrupted with a firmness that surprised even himself. "No one is saying he is," Vivian replied, softening her voice like a snake that strokes before it strikes. "I'm only saying it would be prudent to do a little background check. Know who this woman is before you open the doors of your home and your family to her." Marcus said nothing, and even though it irritated him to admit it, part of him recognized that Vivian had a point. Not out of distrust toward Rosa, but because he needed to understand how a woman with that kind of musical talent had ended up cleaning other people's homes. That same morning, Marcus made a decision. Instead of going directly to Harrington Hospitality headquarters, he asked his personal assistant, a discreet and efficient man named Gerald Moore, to look into Rosa Delgado's background. Not an invasive investigation, not like a background check for a criminal. He simply wanted to understand her story. Meanwhile, in the service kitchen, Rosa was setting out her cleaning supplies with shaking hands. She had not slept all night. Eleanor's words kept spinning through her head like a tornado, threatening to tear down what little she had managed to build. This job was her only income, the only barrier between her and the street, between Daniel and hunger. "Mom, are you okay?" asked Daniel, sitting in a corner of the kitchen with an old notebook where he was drawing as he waited for his mother to finish her morning tasks before dropping him at his community school. "I'm fine, baby," Rosa lied, with that skill mothers develop to disguise fear behind a smile. "Is the old lady mad because I played with Lily?" Daniel asked, without looking up from his drawing. With that brutal perception children develop when they have learned to read the room to survive. Rosa knelt beside her son and stroked his head. "Don't you worry about that, Daniel. You did nothing wrong. Playing with someone who is sad is one of the kindest things a person can do." "My dad told me that," Daniel replied naturally, as if he were mentioning the weather. "He said music and friendship can heal anything." Rosa had to hold herself together so her son would not see her cry. The mention of her husband always opened a wound that never quite closed. But before she could respond, the kitchen door opened, and someone Rosa had not expected to see that early appeared. Marcus Harrington was standing in the doorway of the service kitchen, a place where he had probably not set foot in years. His presence there was so unusual that even the cook, Mrs. Thompson, dropped the wooden spoon she was holding. "Rosa, can we talk for a moment?" Marcus asked in a tone trying to be casual, but clearly betraying nerves. "Of course, Mr. Harrington. In the library, if that's all right, and feel free to bring Daniel." Rosa and Daniel followed Marcus through the hallways of the estate to the library. A vast room lined with shelves stretching floor to ceiling, smelling of aged wood and forgotten pages. Daniel looked around with huge eyes, as if he had just walked into a castle from a storybook. "Rosa," Marcus began settling into the chair across the reading table. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." Rosa nodded, squeezing Daniel's hand under the table. "Where did you learn to play guitar like that?" Of all the questions Rosa had imagined, that was the one she least expected, and the one she feared most. Her face shifted, as if someone had opened a door she had spent years trying to keep locked tight. "That was a different life, Mr. Harrington," Rosa replied quietly. "A life that no longer exists." "I'd like to know about that life," Marcus pressed gently. "Not as your employer, as the father of a little girl who smiled last night because of you." Rosa was silent for a long moment. Daniel watched his mother with those eyes that knew parts of the story, but not all of it. Finally, Rosa breathed in deeply and began to speak. "I studied music from the time I was very small. My father was a carpenter, but he loved the guitar more than anything in the world. He taught me my first chords before I could read. When I grew up, I won a scholarship to study at the National Conservatory of Music. I was the first person in my family to ever step foot on a university campus." Marcus listened without interrupting, captivated by every word. "During my years at the conservatory, they told me I had something special, not just technique, but something that cannot be taught. I was selected to represent the country at an international classical music festival. It was my chance to change my life, my family's life, to prove that a carpenter's daughter could go as far as her talent could carry her." "And then what happened?" Marcus asked, because the pain in Rosa's eyes made it clear the story did not have a happy ending. "I met Marco," Rosa said, and when she spoke that name, her voice transformed into something softer, more vulnerable, as if the name itself were an old melody. "He was a luthier. He made handcrafted instruments. We met because he built the guitar I was going to play at the festival. We fell in love before the guitar was even finished." Daniel looked up. "My dad," he whispered, with a sad smile that no child should know how to make. "Yes, baby, your dad," Rosa confirmed, smoothing his hair with her hand. "We got married shortly after the festival. I kept performing, he kept building guitars. We were happy. We didn't have much money, but we had music, and for us, that was enough." "And the guitar you were playing last night?" Marcus asked, beginning to connect the pieces. "It was the last guitar Marco ever built," Rosa replied, and her voice finally broke. "He finished it just weeks before the accident. That morning he left for his workshop like any other day. I never imagined it would be the last time I would see him alive. When they called me to tell me that the ceiling had collapsed, I felt the world split in two. Marco did not make it out in time, and when he was gone, everything went with him." She paused, pressing her lips together tightly. "I couldn't play for months. Every time I picked up the guitar, I felt his presence so strongly that I couldn't breathe. I left the conservatory. I left music. I left everything. All I had left was Daniel and the promise I made to Marco that our son would never go hungry." "So that's why you started working in cleaning," Marcus said, not as a question, as an understanding that struck him in the chest. "Nobody hires a classical guitarist to pay household bills, Mr. Harrington, but every house needs someone to clean it." She paused. "So I put Marco's guitar away in its case and learned how to use a broom. And every night after Daniel fell asleep, I would take the guitar out and play in silence, just to feel that he was still close." Marcus had to look away, because his eyes had filled with tears he did not want to show.
Rosa's story had opened a wound he also carried. The wound of a man who had lost the woman he loved and did not know how to move forward. "I want Daniel here every day after school," Marcus said, his voice steadier than he expected. "I want him to play with Lily. I want you to play guitar. I want them to do exactly what they did last night, every single day." "Mr. Harrington, your mother—" "I'll handle my mother." Marcus read Gerald's message 3 times before picking up his phone to call.
His fingers trembled as he dialed. Every second without an answer felt like an eternity. When Gerald finally picked up, his voice carried that low, serious tone he only used when the news was heavy. "Mr. Harrington, what I've found is not something I can tell you over the phone.
Can you meet me at the estate?"
Come now," Marcus said, and hung up. While he waited for Gerald, Marcus went downstairs to find Rosa. He needed to get to her before his mother did. Eleanor had announced the night before that she would speak with Rosa first thing this morning. Marcus needed to get there first, to protect the housekeeper from whatever was being planned, but when he reached the main foyer, he was already too late. Eleanor was standing in front of Rosa, who kept her head bowed while holding a cleaning rag between her hands, as if it were the only thing keeping her anchored to the earth. A few feet away, Vivian Carter observed the scene from against the wall, arms crossed, wearing an expression of satisfaction, and she was working to hide. "I am going to explain this to you one time, Ms. Delgado," Eleanor was saying in her voice made of polished ice. "This house has rules that existed long before you arrived and will continue long after you are gone. Employees do not mix their personal lives with their work. The children of employees do not play with the children of employers, and nobody, absolutely nobody, plays musical instruments in the main living room as if this were a neighborhood bar. Mrs. Harrington, I assure you it will not happen again. I am not finished." Eleanor raised one hand with the authority of someone accustomed to the entire world stopping when she speaks. "What you did last night was not simply bringing your son without permission. What you did was take advantage of my granddaughter's vulnerability. Lily is a fragile child under professional care, and you, without any training or any right, decided to play therapist with a guitar. I never meant to—" "What you meant is irrelevant. Results are what matter. And the result is that my granddaughter will now form an emotional attachment to your son and to you, which will complicate all the work that real professionals have been doing." Marcus clenched his fists at his sides. Every word from his mother burned through him. But he knew that interrupting Eleanor mid-lecture would only make things worse. He needed to wait for exactly the right moment. "So these are the new conditions," Eleanor continued, pulling a folded paper from the pocket of her blazer. "First, your son does not set foot in this house again under any circumstances. Second, you limit yourself exclusively to your cleaning duties, with no interaction with Lily beyond what is strictly necessary. Third, that guitar leaves this property today. If you accept these conditions, you may keep your job. If you do not, Vivian has your final paycheck ready." Vivian nodded from her corner, lifting an envelope that clearly contained documents prepared well in advance. Everything had been calculated, orchestrated like a military operation designed to leave no way out. Rosa lifted her gaze for the first time since the conversation had begun, and Marcus could see something in her eyes that split him in half. Not fear, not submission. Pain. The pain of someone being asked to give up the last thing she has left of the person she loved. Her guitar. Marco's guitar. The guitar where Marco's soul lived. "Mrs. Harrington," Rosa said in a voice that trembled but refused to shatter entirely. "I can accept not bringing my son.
I can accept limiting myself to my duties, but that guitar is the only thing I have left of my husband. It is the only thing my son has of his father. I cannot— Mother, enough. Marcus's voice cut through the room like lightning splitting an ancient tree. Everyone turned toward him. Eleanor with surprise, Vivian with alarm, Rosa with a mixture of relief and terror that his intervention might make everything worse. Rodrigo, this is a conversation about the management of the household, and, as I have always told you, this is a conversation about my daughter, Marcus interrupted, walking toward the center of the foyer with steady steps. Lily is my daughter, not an administrative project. And what Rosa and Daniel accomplished in a single afternoon is more than any professional has managed in years. So there will be no new conditions. There will be no final paycheck. And that guitar is not leaving this house. The silence that followed was so heavy, it seemed to have a physical shape. Eleanor looked at her son with an expression Marcus knew far too well. The look of a woman unaccustomed to losing battles. And with absolutely no intention of starting now. You are making a mistake, son, Eleanor said quietly, almost a whisper, when the consequences come. I hope you remember this moment. Eleanor left, with Vivian right behind her. The foyer fell silent. Rosa was visibly shaking, and Marcus had to resist the impulse to step closer and comfort her, aware that any gesture of closeness could be misread by the eyes that were undoubtedly watching from every corner of that house. Thank you, Mr. Harrington, Rosa whispered. Don't thank me. What you did for Lily, I should be the one on my knees thanking you. Before either of them could say another word, the doorbell rang. Gerald Moore, punctual as always, briefcase tucked under his arm, an expression that confirmed what he carried was not simple. Marcus received him in his private study, locking the door behind them. Gerald opened the briefcase and placed a folder on the desk with the delicacy of someone handling explosive material. Sir, I did a basic search as you asked. Public records, digital archives, press clippings. What I found was unexpected. Marcus opened the folder. The first pages were digital newspaper and magazine clippings from several years back. In all of them appeared the name Rosa Delgado associated with the National Conservatory of Music, but not as just any student. Rosa Delgado was considered one of the most gifted guitarists of her generation, Gerald explained as Marcus read with widening eyes. She won 3 national awards before completing her studies. She was selected to represent the country at the International Music Festival in Vienna. The press called her the voice of the strings. She was, according to all the experts, an artist destined to change the history of classical music on this continent. And what happened? Marcus asked, though he already knew part of the answer from the library conversation that morning. This is where things get complicated, sir, Gerald said, turning to the next section of the folder. Rosa's husband, Marco, was a luthier, a well-known craftsman who built instruments for professional musicians. But what Rosa likely did not tell you is exactly how he died. Marcus stopped reading and looked directly into his assistant's eyes. Marco worked building instruments in a workshop that operated inside an industrial building. That building was owned by a corporate conglomerate that had ignored years of warnings about structural problems and safety conditions. One day, part of the workshop's ceiling collapsed. Marco was the only worker who did not make it out in time. God, Marcus murmured. But that's not all, sir. Rosa tried to sue the company that owned the building. She hired a lawyer with the small savings she had. But the company had a powerful legal team that crushed the case before it ever reached trial. She received no compensation whatsoever. The legal fees left her in total ruin. She lost her apartment, lost her savings, lost everything. And the company never accepted a single day of responsibility. Marcus felt each revelation hit his chest harder than the last, but what Gerald said next made the floor disappear beneath his feet. "Sir, I investigated which company owned that industrial building. The conglomerate that ignored the safety warnings, that let Marco die, and then legally destroyed his widow to avoid paying a single cent of compensation." Gerald paused. The pause felt like an eternity. "The building belonged to Harrington Development Holdings, the company your father founded and that your mother managed during the years you were focused exclusively on the hotel business." Marcus went completely still. His brain was trying to process the information, but it was as if Gerald's words were written in a language he could no longer understand. "You are telling me that my family, that my father's company, is responsible for Marco's death?" "I am telling you that Harrington Development Holdings owned the building where Marco died, and that the legal team that crushed Rosa's lawsuit was hired and directed by one single person." "Who?" "Eleanor Harrington, your mother." The world stopped turning for Marcus in that instant. The walls of his study seemed to close in around him as his mind desperately tried to connect the pieces of a monstrous puzzle. His mother had hired Rosa just weeks ago. His mother who now wanted to fire her so urgently. His mother who had destroyed this woman's life before, without anyone ever knowing. "Does Rosa know?" Marcus asked, barely a whisper. "Does she know she is working in the home of the family that destroyed her life?" "That is what I could not determine, sir. But there is something more." "More?" Gerald pulled the last page from the folder. It was a copy of a hospital record. "Your wife, Mrs. Caroline Harrington, before she passed, spent her final weeks admitted to Pinecrest Medical Center. During her last weeks there, she received regular visits from a volunteer who kept her company and played guitar for her to ease her pain. That volunteer signed the visitor log with her full name." Marcus took the paper with trembling hands. He read the name written on the visitor line. Rosa Delgado. The page slipped from his fingers and fell to the floor as Marcus collapsed into his chair, unable to hold up under the weight of a truth that had just split his life into two irreconcilable halves, before knowing and after. The woman who cleaned his house had comforted his dying wife. The woman whose life his mother had destroyed had spent Caroline's final weeks playing guitar beside her hospital bed so she would not die alone. And neither of them had ever known who the other one was. Marcus did not sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, Gerald's revelations replayed in his mind like a horror film he could not turn off. His mother had destroyed Rosa's life. His wife Caroline had been comforted by Rosa in her final days, and now that same woman was cleaning the floors of the Harrington estate, not knowing she was sleeping under the same roof as the people responsible for her tragedy. Or maybe she did know. That possibility was the one that tormented him most. What if Rosa had deliberately sought out this job? What if the whole thing was part of a plan? What if the guitar, the games with Lily, the connection with Daniel, were all pieces of a carefully designed revenge? But then Marcus remembered Rosa's eyes when she spoke about Marco in the library. He remembered the tremor in her voice, the way her son watched her with that mixture of admiration and worry. Nobody could fake that level of pain. Nobody could manufacture that kind of truth. The next morning, Marcus made a decision. He was going to talk to Rosa and tell her everything he had discovered. He could not keep looking her in the eyes while carrying that secret. But before he could find her, something happened that completely changed the course of that day. Lily woke up humming. Marcus was in the hallway when he heard the melody coming from his daughter's room. He stopped with his hand over his heart, paralyzed for the second time in just a few days by a sound he had believed impossible. He moved toward the half-open door and saw Lily sitting on her bed, swinging her bare feet. humming the same song Rosa had played on the guitar that very first night. "Daddy," Lily said when she noticed him in the doorway, "is Daniel coming today?" Marcus knelt beside his daughter's bed and stroked her hair. "Yes, sweetheart, Daniel is coming today. I want him to teach me to spin better. He can spin so many times without falling." Marcus smiled through wet eyes. His daughter was planning activities, expressing wishes, looking forward to things that the best specialists had been trying to achieve for years without result. He decided he needed a professional opinion before speaking with Rosa. He called Dr. Samuel Park, the child therapist who had been treating Lily since Caroline's passing. Dr. Park was a quiet-voiced man with thoughtful eyes who had dedicated his life to healing the invisible wounds of children. "What you are describing is extraordinary, Mr. Harrington," Dr. Park said after listening to everything that had happened. Lily had built an emotional wall as a defense mechanism against the loss of her mother. No conventional therapeutic technique had managed to penetrate it, because that wall was made of the most resilient material in existence: the grief of a child who lost the person she loved most. And how is it possible that a boy and a guitar accomplished what years of therapy could not? Because children do not analyze grief, Mr. Harrington. They simply feel it. When Lily found another child carrying the same wound, something occurred that in psychology we call emotional recognition. Daniel did not try to heal Lily. He simply showed her she was not alone. And that was enough for her to decide for the first time that it was worth feeling again. "Doctor, I need you to come to the estate. I need you to evaluate Lily and tell me exactly what we must do to not destroy this progress." "I'll be there this afternoon," Dr. Park confirmed. But while Marcus was arranging the therapist's visit, in another corner of the estate, something far less noble was taking shape. Vivian Carter had spent the entire night studying a letter she had intercepted from the National Conservatory of Music. The contents of that letter were a bomb, one that could destroy Rosa, or elevate her, depending on who detonated it and with what intention. The letter informed Rosa that the conservatory had launched a special reinstatement program for talented former students who had left their studies due to extraordinary circumstances. The program included a full scholarship access to international instructors and the opportunity to resume her musical career exactly where she had left off. The conservatory was not just remembering Rosa Delgado, it was actively searching for her, because one of her former professors had launched a campaign to recover the lost talents of his generation. Vivian understood immediately the power of that information. If Rosa received that letter, she would have a chance to rebuild her life far from the Harrington estate. She would leave. She would take Daniel with her. And Lily would lose the only connection that had made her smile again. Marcus would blame Rosa for abandoning them, and everything would go back to the way it was before. But Vivian did not simply want Rosa gone. She wanted her gone, disgraced, humiliated, marked as someone who could never be trusted. Because Vivian had watched the way Marcus looked at Rosa, and she recognized that look. It was the same look she had spent years waiting for Marcus to direct at her. So Vivian designed a plan. A plan she presented to Eleanor that same morning while they had tea in the back garden. "We are not delivering the letter," Vivian explained with the precision of someone who has studied every detail. "But we are going to use it. We are going to make it look like Rosa has been using her position in this house for personal gain. That she intentionally got close to Lily to earn Marcus's trust and obtain contacts that would help her return to the music world." Eleanor listened carefully, and in her eyes shone something Vivian interpreted as approval. But the truth was that in Eleanor's mind far more complex and darker calculations were running. She did not simply want to protect her household from a housekeeper who had crossed lines. She needed Rosa to disappear before anyone discovered the connection between Harrington Development Holdings and the death of Marco Delgado. Because if Marcus found that truth, she would not only lose her son forever, the entire family empire would crumble under the weight of a scandal that no attorney could contain. "Do it," Eleanor said, with the coldness of someone signing a death sentence. "But keep it clean. I don't want any scenes." That afternoon, while Dr. Park evaluated Lily in the library, Vivian executed the first phase of her plan. She waited until Rosa was cleaning the west wing of the estate and quietly slipped into the small room the housekeeper used to store her belongings during the workday. There she found what she was looking for: Marco's guitar case. Vivian opened the case carefully and placed inside it an object that would bring Rosa's entire world crashing down. A diamond bracelet belonging to Eleanor. An antique family piece, priceless. The kind of item whose disappearance would trigger an immediate investigation and whose discovery in an employee's belongings would leave no room for doubt. She closed the case, left it exactly as she had found it, and slipped out of the room with the same discretion with which she had entered. The bracelet would be reported missing that very evening. The search would inevitably lead to Rosa's belongings, and when they opened that case in front of Marcus, there would be no explanation in the world that could save the guitarist. Meanwhile, in the library, Dr. Park was finishing his evaluation of Lily with results that left Marcus speechless. "Your daughter has experienced an emotional breakthrough that I would classify as extraordinary," the doctor said, reviewing his notes with an expression of genuine awe. "She has not only recovered the ability to express positive emotions, she is developing new affective bonds, something that just weeks ago seemed completely impossible." "And what do you recommend, doctor?" "Change absolutely nothing. Lily's connection with that boy and with Rosa's music is therapeutic at a level science is only beginning to understand. Interrupting that bond now would be like pulling a plant that has just sprouted after years of drought." Marcus nodded, and in that moment decided that neither his mother nor Vivian nor anyone on earth was going to separate Lily from the people who had managed to give her life back. But life has a cruel way of testing our resolve at the exact moment we believe ourselves to be strongest. That night, after Rosa had finished her shift and was getting ready to leave with Daniel, Eleanor's voice rang through the entire ground floor of the estate like an alarm that freezes the blood. "My bracelet! My mother's bracelet has disappeared!" Within minutes, the entire estate was set into motion. Eleanor demanded every room, every corner, every belonging be searched. Vivian directed the search with a suspicious efficiency, subtly steering the staff toward the wing where Rosa stored her things. Marcus watched the scene with a sick feeling coiling in his gut. Something did not add up. His mother had worn that bracelet hundreds of times and had never lost it. Why now of all nights? But before he could intervene, one of the staff members who had been participating in the search approached Vivian with an uncomfortable expression. "Ms. Carter, we found something in Ms. Delgado's room." The silence that fell over the estate was absolute. Every pair of eyes turned to Rosa, who was standing near the front door, with Daniel holding her hand, ready to head home. Her face reflected complete confusion. The confusion of someone who does not understand why suddenly the entire world is looking at her as if she has committed an unforgivable crime. Vivian walked to Rosa's room and came back holding the guitar case. Open. Inside it, gleaming under the foyer lights like a silent accusation, was Eleanor's diamond bracelet. "No," whispered Rosa, shaking her head as she stepped back. "That is not possible. I never—" "The evidence speaks for itself," Eleanor pronounced with a coldness that could have frozen the sun. Marcus stared at the scene and felt his brain processing 1,000 possibilities per second. The guitar case, Marco's guitar case. They had placed the bracelet inside Marco's guitar, not in a purse, not in a drawer, but in the most sacred object Rosa possessed. And that was precisely what made no sense, because no person who hides something stolen keeps it in the one place they guard with their life. Someone had put that bracelet there deliberately. Someone who knew exactly what that guitar meant to Rosa, who had chosen that hiding place on purpose to make the accusation more devastating, more personal, more impossible to refute. And while Marcus was arriving at that conclusion, little Daniel let go of his mother's hand. He took one step forward, and with the trembling but firm voice of a child who has seen too many injustices to stay quiet, he said something that left every person in that foyer rooted to the spot. My mom would never put anything inside that guitar. That guitar belongs to my dad. It's the most important thing we have. If someone put that thing in there, it was someone who wants to hurt my mom. And I know that in this house there are people who do not want us here. Daniel's eyes, without pointing at anyone specifically, swept the foyer with a clarity that shook even Eleanor. And Vivian, for the first time since she had designed her perfect plan, felt something she had not anticipated. Fear. Fear of a child who had just spoken the most dangerous truth of all. Not because he had proof, but because he had said it with the unshakable conviction of someone who knows his mother's heart better than anyone in the world. Daniel's words hung in the foyer air like a verdict no one dared touch. Marcus looked at the boy with an admiration that hurt, because this small child had just done what no adult in that estate had had the courage to do. He had told the truth, without embellishment, without calculation. But Eleanor was not a woman who let herself be rattled by a child's words. "How touching," she said, with that frozen smile she wore when she felt threatened, but would never admit it. A boy defending his mother. Natural, understandable. But feelings do not erase evidence. The bracelet was in her belongings, Miss Delgado. That is a fact. A fact that someone manufactured, Marcus said, stepping forward and placing himself between his mother and Rosa like a human shield. "Are you accusing someone in this house of planting false evidence?" Eleanor asked, arching an eyebrow with perfectly performed disbelief. "Whom exactly, Marcus?" "Me, Vivian. The staff who have worked here for years with spotless loyalty. I am saying that Rosa did not put that bracelet there. And how can you be so certain? You have known her for weeks. I have lived in this house for decades. I have cared for every object, every memory, every piece of this family. And you would rather believe a stranger than your own mother." Eleanor's words were designed to strike exactly where they hurt most, in family loyalty, and Marcus felt them land their mark. Because despite everything he knew, despite Gerald's revelations, she was still his mother. The woman who had raised him, who had stood beside him through the worst moments of his life, who had held this family together after his father died. It was that moment of hesitation that Rosa noticed, with the sensitivity of someone who has learned to read silences in order to survive. "Mr. Harrington," Rosa said quietly, with a calm that had found itself unexpectedly in the middle of chaos. "You don't have to fight with your mother on my account. I know what I did and what I did not do. My conscience is clear." She reached down and lifted the guitar case, gently removed Eleanor's bracelet, and set it softly on the foyer table. Then she drew out Marco's guitar, the one possession in the world that actually mattered to her, and she held it against her chest the way someone holds a living person. "You can keep the bracelet. You can search every corner of my life if you want. You will find nothing, because there is nothing to find. The only thing I am taking from this house is what I came in with, my guitar, and my son." "Rosa, wait," Marcus said desperately, but she was already walking toward the door. "Mom, "Are we not coming back?" Daniel asked quietly, taking her hand as they walked. Rosa did not answer, because if she opened her mouth in that moment, she would break completely in front of the same people who had orchestrated her humiliation. And that was something her pride, the only piece of herself she still had intact, was not prepared to allow. The days that followed were the darkest the Harrington estate had lived through since Caroline's death. Lily stopped humming, stopped asking anyone to play with her, stopped coming down to the living room where she had once danced with Daniel. She locked herself in her room with that quiet determination of children who decide the world has hurt them too many times and that the only way to protect themselves is to disappear from the inside. Dr. Park visited the estate several times. Every visit ended with the same devastating diagnosis. "Lily is regressing, Mr. Harrington, and she is doing it faster than she advanced. If we do not restore the stimulus that triggered her emotional opening, I am at risk of her closing herself off permanently." "Permanently? What does that mean exactly, Doctor?" The silence before Dr. Park answered was the most terrifying response Marcus had ever received in his life. "It means we could lose her, Mr. Harrington. Not physically, but emotionally. There is a point in the process of childhood emotional withdrawal from which there is no return. If Lily crosses that threshold, no therapy, no stimulus, no intervention will be able to bring her back." Marcus left Dr. Park's office shaking. He needed to find Rosa. Not tomorrow, not next week, now. Every hour that passed was 1 hour closer to losing his daughter forever. But the city was vast, and Rosa did not want to be found. Marcus hired investigators, reviewed records, contacted community schools where Daniel might have enrolled, visited shelters, asked at churches in the neighborhoods where people went when they had nowhere else to turn. Nothing. Rosa Delgado had disappeared with the efficiency of someone who already knew what it was to lose everything and start from zero. While Marcus consumed himself searching for Rosa, something began to change inside the estate. The atmosphere grew heavy, as if the very walls knew that an injustice had been committed beneath their roof and were demanding reparation. The household staff murmured in the hallways. Mrs. Thompson, the cook, stopped preparing Eleanor's favorite dishes without offering any explanation. The gardeners avoided crossing paths with Vivian, as if her presence made them feel something they could not put into words. And it was Mrs. Thompson who one day approached Marcus with the caution of someone who knows that what she is about to say could carry enormous consequences. "Mr. Marcus, forgive me for sticking my nose where it does not belong," the cook said quietly, making sure no one else could hear. "But my conscience will not let me sleep. The night the bracelet disappeared, I was in the kitchen preparing the next day's bread. From the kitchen you can see the hallway that leads to the room where Miss Delgado kept her things." Marcus stopped breathing. "That night, well before the whole scene was made, I saw Miss Carter walk into that room. She was inside for several minutes and came out empty-handed. At the time, I did not think much of it. But after what happened, sir—" Mrs. Thompson paused. "Rosa did not put that bracelet there. I am telling you, with the certainty of a woman who has watched honesty and dishonesty pass through this kitchen for many, many years. That young woman is innocent." Mrs. Thompson's testimony fell on Marcus like the final piece of a puzzle he already knew, but had needed someone else to confirm. Vivian had planted the bracelet. His mother had authorized it. And together they had driven from this house the only person who had managed to give Lily her life back. Marcus walked directly to his mother's office. He did not knock. He pushed the door wide open. He found Eleanor sitting at her desk, reviewing documents as if the world were not falling apart around her. "We need to talk, Mother, and this time you are going to tell me the truth." "Marcus, I don't know what you are—" "Vivian planted the bracelet in Rosa's things. I have a witness. And before you try to discredit her, there is something else you need to know."
I know about Harrington Development Holdings. I know about the building that collapsed.
I know what you did to Rosa Delgado years before she ever set foot in this house. Eleanor's face changed, as if someone had peeled away a mask she had been wearing for decades. There was no immediate denial, no fabricated outrage. There was something far more disturbing: silence. A silence that admitted everything without speaking a single word. And there is something you also do not know, Mother. Something that is tearing me apart to have to tell you. Marcus's voice cracked. Rosa was the person who sat with Caroline in her final days. While you were arranging funerals and I was drowning in grief, a stranger was sitting beside my wife and playing guitar for her so she would not feel afraid as she left this world. That stranger was Rosa, the same woman whose husband died because of our company's negligence, the same woman you just drove out of our lives like she was garbage. Eleanor pressed her hand to her chest. For the first time in Marcus's life, he saw something in his mother's eyes he had never believed possible. Remorse. A remorse so deep and so old it seemed to have been buried under tons of pride for decades, just waiting for this exact moment to surface and claim what was owed. Marcus, Eleanor whispered, but her son was already out the door. Because Marcus Harrington no longer had time for explanations or apologies, his daughter was fading. Rosa was gone, and every second that passed was a second he could not get back. That same night, while Marcus was reviewing the investigators' reports one last time, without finding anything, his phone rang, an unknown number. "Mr. Harrington," said a female voice he did not recognize. "My name is Renata Olivares. I am the director of a community shelter called Open Hands. A woman came here a few days ago with her small son. She would not give us her real name. She registered as Maria. But the boy tells anyone who will listen that his mom plays the most beautiful guitar in the world, and that he misses a little girl named Lily." His daughter's name in that boy's voice hit Marcus directly in the center of his chest. "I found your number on a card the boy had in his pocket. I believe you are the person this child is trying to reach." Marcus grabbed his car keys before the woman finished speaking. He drove through the city streets like a man possessed. Traffic lights blurred through the windshield as he repeated Renata's words in his mind. A boy who says his daddy lives inside a guitar. Only one boy in the entire world said that. Only one. Open Hands Community Shelter was in a part of the city Marcus had never visited. Streets narrowed as he drove. Buildings grew lower, sidewalks more cracked. When he finally parked in front of the shelter, he had to sit inside the car for a moment, working to control the trembling of his hands before getting out. The building was a modest structure, its walls painted in a color that had once been cheerful, but that time had turned into something tired. A plaque beside the door read, "Open Hands Community Shelter, because no one should face the night alone." Renata Olivares was waiting at the entrance. She was a woman with steady eyes and hands roughened by years of social work, the kind of person who had seen so much suffering that she was no longer surprised by anything, but who had never hardened quite enough to stop being moved. "Mr. Harrington, before you go in, I need to tell you something," Renata said in a calm, direct voice. When the woman and the boy arrived, she was in a very fragile emotional state. She did not want to give her real name. She registered as Maria. But the boy, she paused. Daniel told anyone who would listen that his mom played the most beautiful guitar in the world, and that he missed a girl named Lily. I found him crying alone in the courtyard one night. He told me that Lily had no one to make her smile, and that he wanted to go back because she needed him. Marcus felt that like a punch to the gut. "I found her crying one night in the courtyard," Renata continued.
She was sitting on the ground, holding her guitar, rocking it like it was a baby. I didn't ask her anything. I just sat beside her. After a long while, she said one sentence to me.
They took away the only good thing I had left, and it was not even my fault. I didn't understand at the time what she meant, but now that I see you standing here, I think I'm beginning to.
Can I see her? Marcus asked, his voice thick.
You can, but I am warning you of something. That woman has wounded pride, and wounds of pride are the slowest to heal. This will not be easy.
Renata guided him through a narrow hallway to an interior courtyard where several children were playing under the soft hum of overhead lights.
And there, sitting on a wooden bench against the farthest wall, with Marco's guitar leaning beside her like a quiet companion, was Rosa Delgado.
Marcus stopped several meters away. Rosa was staring at some point on the ground, hands folded in her lap.
She looked thinner than he remembered, with shadows beneath her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and days not eating enough. And yet, even in those conditions, there was something in her posture that refused to break, a dignity that seemed built from a material no humiliation could bend. Daniel was the first to see him. The boy had been playing with other children from the shelter when his eyes crossed Marcus's. He froze for a second, as if his brain needed confirmation that the image was real and not another of those dreams he had every night where he went back to the estate and danced with Lily. Then, without a word, he ran to his mother and tugged her sleeve. "Mom!" Daniel whispered. "Mom, look." Rosa looked up. Her eyes found Marcus Harrington standing in a community shelter courtyard, wrinkled suit, red eyes, wearing an expression that was equal parts relief and shame. Rosa's face transformed in a fraction of a second. First surprise, then confusion, then something Marcus recognized with painful clarity. Distrust. The distrust of someone who has been betrayed too many times to believe that anyone comes with good intentions. "What are you doing here?" Rosa asked, standing up with the same upright posture she had maintained the night she walked out of the estate. "I came to find you." "For what? To accuse me of something else? Did a necklace go missing now? A ring? Do you want to search my guitar again for a diamond crown?" Each word left Rosa's mouth loaded with a pain that had fermented over days of uncertainty, nights in a shelter, mornings explaining to her son why they could not go back to the house where he had a friend. Rosa, the bracelet was planted. Rosa said nothing. Her expression did not change. "Vivian Carter put the bracelet inside your guitar case. I have a witness who saw her go into your room that night. The whole thing was a trap, designed to get you out of the house." "And why should I believe you?" Rosa responded with a calm more devastating than any shout. "Your mother humiliated me in front of the whole household. She treated me like a criminal in front of my son. And you, Mr. Harrington, you stood there hesitating. I saw how your mother's words made you doubt. I saw that moment in your eyes, that instant when you considered the possibility that I might be guilty." She paused. And that instant, that one single instant of doubt, hurt more than everything else combined. Marcus received those words like punches he knew he deserved. Rosa was right. He had doubted. For a fraction of a second. He had let his mother's voice weigh more than what his own eyes had seen. More than what his own heart knew was true. "You are right," Marcus said without trying to defend himself. "I doubted, and I hate myself for it. But I am here now, and I did not come only to tell you that you are innocent. I came because I need to tell you something I discovered. Something you deserve to know, even if it destroys me to say it." Rosa looked at him with narrowed eyes.
the eyes of someone evaluating whether it is worth opening a door that might hide another betrayal behind it. What thing? Marcus breathed in deeply. What he was about to say could make Rosa hate him forever. It could destroy any chance of her coming back. But he had learned, perhaps too late, that the truth was the only thing that could heal wounds that lies had caused. Your husband, Marco, his workshop, the building that collapsed. That building belonged to a company in my family, Harrington Development Holdings. My mother managed that company during those years. She was the one who ordered the legal team to block your lawsuit after Marco's death. The silence that followed was not a normal silence. It was a silence that had weight, texture, temperature. A silence you could touch and that burned. Rosa took one step backward, as if Marcus's words were a physical force pushing her away. Her eyes filled with tears that refused to fall, held back by a will that had learned not to break in public. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. Her hands began to shake in a way that made Daniel take her fingers in both his small hands, not understanding what was happening, but knowing instinctively that his mother needed him. "You are telling me," Rosa began, her voice barely audible, "that Marco died because of your family? That I lost everything, my career, my home, my entire life because your mother decided it was cheaper to leave me in ruins than to accept responsibility? And that after all of that, I ended up cleaning the floors of the home of the very same people who destroyed my world? You knew when you hired me, didn't you?" I found out afterward. "My mother was the one who hired you. And now I understand she did it precisely because she did not want anyone outside the family to remember the case. By keeping you close, she controlled the situation." Rosa closed her eyes. The tears finally found their path down her cheeks. Silent, steady, like a river that breaks through a dam that has been holding back too much for too long. "There is something more," Marcus said, and his own voice broke as he spoke the next words. "My wife, Caroline, before she passed, spent her final weeks at Pinecrest Medical Center. A volunteer visited her every day and played guitar for her to ease her pain. That volunteer was you, Rosa. You sat with my wife in her final days, and neither of you ever knew who the other one was." Rosa's eyes flew open. Her expression shifted from pain to disbelief, from disbelief to something that had no name in any language, an emotion so complex and so deep it seemed to hold centuries of human history in a single instant. "Caroline," Rosa whispered, "the woman in the room at the end of the hall, the one who asked me to play that lullaby every afternoon because she said it reminded her of her daughter." Marcus could not respond. The tears won the battle, and he sank onto the bench where Rosa had been sitting moments before, covering his face with his hands as his body shook with sobs that came from somewhere so deep they seemed to tear pieces from his soul. "I was singing to Lily," Rosa continued, and now she was crying without restraint as well. "Caroline talked about her daughter every single day. She told me Lily was the sweetest girl in the world, that she had a laugh that could light up any room. She asked me that if life ever put me in front of a sad child, to play her that song, because that song had the power to heal any pain." "The song you played for Lily that night in the living room," Marcus whispered, lifting his face. "It was Caroline's song, the song your wife taught me for her daughter, without knowing that one day I would end up playing it for her." Daniel watched his mother and Marcus without fully understanding what was happening, but knowing, with that sacred intuition of childhood, that something very large was breaking and rebuilding itself at the same time right there in that shelter courtyard. "Mr. Harrington," Rosa said, wiping her tears with the back of her hand, "I did not know who you were when I accepted the job. I never connected the name.
When I saw Lily sitting alone on those stairs, the only thing I saw was a sad little girl. I did not see the daughter of the man whose family destroyed mine. I saw a child who needed exactly what my son needed. Someone to remind her that life could still be beautiful. And now that you know everything, Marcus said with genuine fear in his voice, now that you know who we are, what we did, what my mother did to you, can you forgive us? Rosa looked at her son, who was still holding her fingers in those small hands that understood nothing of last names, companies, or lawsuits. Then she looked at Marco's guitar, leaning against the wall, waiting in silence, the way it always did. Marco taught me something I never forgot, Rosa said, her voice steady despite the tears. He told me that music exists to transform pain into something beautiful. That if you stay trapped in resentment, the guitar stops singing. And I cannot allow this guitar to stop singing, Mr. Harrington. Because the day it goes silent, I will have lost Marco for good. Marcus understood in that moment that Rosa was not saying she forgave him. She was saying something far deeper. That she chose music over hatred, life over revenge, the future over the past. Not because it was easy, but because it was the only way to honor the man who had put his soul inside a guitar. Rosa, I need to ask you something, Marcus said, getting to his feet, and I need you to know that I am not asking this for myself. I am asking it for Lily. My daughter is fading again. The doctor says if she doesn't recover the connection she had with Daniel, we could lose her emotionally. Permanently. Lily needs Daniel, and she needs your music. The music Caroline left her without knowing. Rosa looked at Daniel. The boy who had heard Lily's name lit up like two stars igniting in the middle of the darkest night. Mom, Daniel said in that voice that could disarm armies. Lily needs me. And with those 3 words, a child decided the destiny of 2 families that life had struck separated and destroyed, and that now, in the courtyard of a community shelter, had the chance to rebuild themselves together with the only material that never runs out, the love that survives everything. The drive back to the estate was the quietest Marcus had ever experienced. Rosa sat in the back seat, with Daniel asleep across her lap, worn out by emotions too large for his small body. Marco's guitar occupied the front passenger seat as if it were one more traveler, as if it had its own right to be there. Rosa had not said she forgave him. She had not said she was coming back for good. She had said only, I am going for Lily. And Marcus understood that for now, that was enough. It was more than he deserved. When the car pulled up to the estate, it was almost 2 a.m. The downstairs lights were on, unusual for that hour. Marcus stepped out first and opened the front door, expecting to find a sleeping house. The house was not sleeping. In the foyer, sitting in a chair with a perfectly straight back and hands folded across her knees, was Lily Harrington. Beside her, standing against the wall with a nervous expression, was Vivian Carter. And in front of them, both holding a tablet and wearing the face of someone who would rather be anywhere else on the planet, was Gerald Moore. Sir, said Gerald when he saw Marcus enter, your mother asked to speak with you tonight. She insisted on waiting. Marcus looked at his mother carefully. But something had changed in Eleanor. She was not the woman of ice who issued orders and expected blind obedience. Something in her had shifted, something Marcus had not seen since he was a very small child, and his mother still knew how to cry. Vulnerability. Then Eleanor saw Rosa come in behind Marcus, carrying Daniel asleep in her arms, the guitar slung over her shoulder. The 2 women looked at each other for a moment that compressed years of pain into a single exchange of glances. Rosa did not lower her eyes. Eleanor did not either. But it was Eleanor who spoke first, and what she said made even Gerald hold his breath. "Miss Delgado, please sit down." That please left Eleanor's mouth as if she had needed to pull each letter from somewhere deep and rusted inside herself, a place where kind words had been stored for decades without use. Rosa sat Daniel still asleep against her chest. Marcus remained standing beside her, unsure what to expect. "After my son left this evening," Eleanor began quietly, "I sat alone in my office, and for the first time in a very long time, I looked at myself in the mirror. I did not like what I saw. The silence in the foyer was absolute. Even Vivian did not dare breathe too loudly. When my husband died and left me in charge of his businesses, I was a woman who knew nothing about the corporate world. I learned quickly because I had no other choice. But what I learned was how to protect what was ours at any cost. Every decision I made was to keep this family afloat, to give Marcus a future, to ensure the Harrington name still meant something." She paused. "And in that process, I became someone who stopped seeing people and started seeing only threats." Eleanor's eyes were wet, something Marcus had not witnessed even at his father's funeral. "When the Harrington development building collapsed and your husband died, Ms. Delgado, your name reached my desk in a legal report. You were a line item in a document, a problem to be resolved, a risk to be neutralized. I never stopped to think that behind that name was a woman with a son with shattered dreams, with a guitar that was the only thing she had left of the man she loved." She stopped. "I erased you from my paperwork and moved on as if nothing had happened." Rosa listened without moving, tears falling silently onto Daniel's hair. "And when I hired you to work here, I did it because your name appeared on an applicant list, and something inside me, something I did not want to examine, told me that keeping you close meant keeping the past buried. It was an act of cowardice dressed up as control." Eleanor rose slowly to her feet, with a difficulty that was not physical but emotional, as if the weight of her own words were bending her spine. "I am not going to ask your forgiveness, because I know there are things that cannot be forgiven with words. But I am going to do something I should have done a long time ago." She turned to face Vivian, who had gone as pale as the foyer marble. "Vivian, it was you who placed the bracelet in Ms. Delgado's belongings. Mrs. Thompson saw you enter that room, and it was you who intercepted a letter from the National Conservatory of Music addressed to Rosa. A letter she never received, because you decided she did not deserve it." Vivian opened her mouth to defend herself. Eleanor raised her hand, with that authority that this time was not directed at oppression, but at correction. "I do not need an explanation. I need you to hand over that letter right now. And tomorrow morning, first thing, you will collect your belongings. Your time in this house is over." Vivian looked to Marcus for some kind of rescue, some intervention that might save her. But Marcus's eyes were fixed on his mother, and what they reflected was not triumph, not satisfaction, something closer to awe. The awe of a son discovering that his mother could still surprise him. With shaking hands, Vivian pulled a crumpled envelope from her jacket and set it on the foyer table. Then, without a word, she walked to the door and disappeared into the night. No one stopped her. No one called after her. Her exit was as quiet as all her manipulations had been. Only this time the silence did not hide venom. It held defeat. Eleanor picked up the envelope and handed it to Rosa. "This belongs to you." Rosa took the letter with trembling fingers, opened it slowly, read it. And what appeared on her face was something that no one in that room would ever forget. Hope. Pure, unexpected hope. As fragile and as powerful as the first note of a guitar that that has been silent for years. "It's a scholarship," Rosa whispered. "The conservatory wants me to come back. They want me to finish what I started." "And you are going to?" Eleanor said with a firmness that surprised everyone. "Harrington Development Holdings is going to fund every expense the scholarship does not cover. Housing for you and Daniel, materials, transportation, everything, not as charity, as the debt this family owes you, a debt that has been unpaid for far too long." Marcus looked at his mother, and for the first time in years, he felt that the woman who had raised him, the woman who had existed before the business world hardened her, was back. Not whole, not perfect, but present. And that was a beginning. Rosa held the letter against her chest like a treasure recovered from the bottom of the ocean. But before she could respond, a sound made everyone in the foyer turn toward the staircase. Small footsteps, bare feet, coming down the steps with that careful patience of children who wake in the middle of the night following an instinct they cannot explain. Lily appeared at the foot of the stairs, hair tousled, eyes half closed with sleep. But those eyes opened completely when they saw what, or rather who, was in the foyer. "Daniel," Lily whispered. The boy who had woken from his mother's movement lifted his head from her lap and looked toward the staircase. "Lily!" Daniel climbed down from Rosa's arms and ran toward Lily. The girl came down the last few steps and ran toward him with a speed that contradicted every day of emotional numbness she had endured. They met in the center of the foyer, and they embraced with that disproportionate force that children's hugs carry when they are reunited with someone they thought they had lost. "You left," Lily said, her voice cracking. And those two words held every abandonment that child had accumulated. First the loss of her mother, then the disappearance of her only friend. "But I came back," Daniel answered with that monumental simplicity that was his gift. "And I brought my dad's guitar, so your mommy in heaven can hear us dance again." The song Caroline had given to the world filled every corner of the Harrington estate like a wave that carries away everything old and broken and leaves behind only what is worth keeping. Lily and Daniel danced hand in hand in the center of the foyer exactly as they had that very first night. But this time with witnesses who were crying and laughing at the same time. Marcus knelt beside his daughter, and she pulled him to join them. Eleanor, standing on the edge of the room, steadied by the small hand of a child who was teaching her something no business deal or family fortune had ever managed to teach her, swayed gently to the rhythm of a melody that healed everything it touched. Weeks later, Rosa returned to the National Conservatory of Music. Her return was news across the music community, and her former professor, upon watching her play Marco's guitar in her first class back, said something that became a legend in those halls. Technique can be taught, but what Rosa has inside her, you cannot learn that. You live it, you grieve it, and then you turn it into music. Daniel enrolled in the same school as Lily. The two became inseparable. A pair of children who had understood before most adults that shared wounds heal faster than hidden ones. Eleanor, in time, created a foundation in the name of Rosa Delgado, dedicated to ensuring safe working conditions for craftsmen and independent workers. She did not announce it in the press, did not seek recognition. She did it quietly, the same way she had caused the harm. But this time, leaving behind a mark of repair instead of destruction. And Marcus, on one ordinary afternoon, came home from work and found the same scene that had changed his life forever. Rosa playing guitar in the living room, while Lily and Daniel danced barefoot on the rug. But this time he did not freeze in the doorway. This time he walked in, sat down beside Rosa, and listened to the song his wife had given to the world. Without knowing that melody would one day unite the two families who needed each other most. That night before bed, Lily asked her father something. Daddy, do you think Mommy and Daniel's daddy know each other in heaven? Marcus smiled through wet eyes.
I am certain of it, sweetheart. And I am certain they are dancing. Lily closed her eyes. A smile lit her face more brightly than every light in that house combined.
And somewhere in the universe, a lullaby kept playing, played by a guitar that held the soul of a man who had kept his promise. As long as those strings vibrated, he would never fully be gone. There are instruments built from wood and strings, and then there are others, the most precious kind, built from love, from loss, from the unbreakable decision to turn pain into the most beautiful melody the world has ever heard. And that guitar, the last guitar Rosa Delgado ever built, never stopped singing.